Hello everyone, it's Christine here, and I've got some video questions for you. I've got 4 here to answer, I think, and some of them are more demonstration based, some of them are about industry and casting and whatnot, so I don't know, let's get started. The first one I had was, what's something you found yourself struggling with vocally recently, like, parentheses, trying to belt a certain note, singing a certain style, etc., and what have you been doing to work on it, like vocal exercises, etc.? Well, I've got some specific things that I'm working on right now. Right now I am working on riffing, and I'm actually watching Natalie Weiss's breaking down the riff videos because I think they're really fun and approachable. And she kind of really breaks down each one, so I like to watch those and kind of work on them and just try them out on my own. I'm not really a riffer, and so it's just something I've been trying to work on slowly over time so that I can have more flexibility in my riffing when I am called upon to do it. So I've been doing that. I'm also working on Ghost Quartet right now, and so I've been practicing Hero a lot and kind of reanalyzing it vocally. The original singer and I have very different voices, and so figuring out how does it work in my voice and whatnot. Right now I've been working a lot on, at the end of it, there's this section that goes, I'm the same as you, and then we go into this like very light airy thing, and then we go into this belty, and you're there too, well, very forward. So I've been working on getting back and forth there, and then when we get into this final, you drove that train right through my heart. So that's another transition from this really high belt sound into this low, thick sound. So I've been working on those transitions and making them sound as smooth as they can, also just seamless, not like, oh my gosh, I'm having to navigate through here. And so the way I've been doing that is really playing around with exercises where I am forced to do that. In the context of the song, there's a lot of stress involved of like, oh my gosh, this has to sound like this, there's these words, blah, blah, blah. That's why I like to look at exercises in particular where there's no context, there's no preconceived notions. I'm not supposed to sound pretty, I'm not supposed to sound like the original character, I'm just doing an exercise. So for instance, taking a similar challenge to what's in that song and going and doing it an exercise. So maybe I do for the transition between the more floaty sound into the more belty sound, maybe I do a ooh, ooh, and go back and forth between those, or maybe going from the high belt to the low belt, that oh, that transition, maybe I go hey, and I go from that high belt and then work to transition down. Maybe if that's too hard, I take a break in between and go, hey, yeah, and take a breath in between to help myself figure out where am I going in this? What's the trajectory? And then you connect them back together. So I've been just kind of focusing in on those specific things that I've been working on and trying to be all right, how am I going to make this work practically speaking and make it sound as seamless as possible? I would just say, as you're working on your own, if you come across a challenge in a song, don't expect yourself to just be able to hammer it over and over again in the song and for it somehow to just miraculously get better. I really like taking things out of context and taking away my preconceived notions and just looking at it in a more open-minded way where I really just evaluate what's going on internally. It takes a lot of the judgment out of well, that didn't sound good. Instead, it's all right, here's my goal. Let's do this in an exercise where I'm less likely to judge my polished sound. So that's kind of what I've been working on lately. The next question I've got is, could you talk more about age when it comes to casting and choosing audition material? When is it appropriate to maybe go out of range? How can we make sure we're making appropriate choices? It's such a good question. I've got so many thoughts there because it really is about context. Let's say you're auditioning for high school theater and you are, a freshman in high school and you're auditioning for Into the Woods or something like that. Breaking a rule on age constraint, let's say you're at a high school freshman and you want to play Jack's mother, because there's not going to be any high schooler who's age appropriate for Jack's mother. So suddenly you have permission to go sing those songs that in the professional world you would not be able to sing, you would not be allowed to sing. So in high school, age constraint really goes out the window because think about it, they're casting everyone within the 14 to 18 range. In college, similarly, they're casting everything between the 18 and 22 range. And so age constraints for auditions for shows don't really exist there. Now, if you're in college and you're working on your audition book, that's a different story, because then you're really looking for things that fit your age range. Now, all of that to say, age range is not like a hard and fast rule where it's like it must be 2 years of outside of your range or out of your age. You know, if you're 20, then you can be between 18 and 22, period. It doesn't really work like that. On stage, I still have not played my own age on stage, maybe once. I'm 27 now, and I'm just now in the place where they're like, oh, you could play like a 22-year-old. You know, I'm tall, so that gets me out of like child range, but I play very, very young on stage because my city happens to be a city that skews more older. So like when we just did Beauty and the Beast at a big theater around here, Belle was in her mid to maybe late 30s, and no one bats an eye at it. You know, it's really normal. Same theater did Little Mermaid, and Ariel again was in her like mid 30s. And so that's kind of just a difference in my particular city. It would not be acceptable for me to bring in a song from someone who's in their 30s. It would just be like, do you know your type? This is ridiculous. Even though I'm almost 30, that would not be acceptable. Now, let's say I was a community theater actor and I was auditioning for like Hairspray and I wanted to be Velma. Wait, did I just make that up? Mrs. Krabs, you know, you know what I'm talking about. The mom, Amber's mom. At a community theater, I might be able to play that role if the other people cast around me are a lot younger. If all the high schoolers in the show are actually cast as 16-year-olds, I might be able to play that role. Or maybe they're going in a totally different... Did you guys see that? Oh, Tali, you can do it. Just going to scooch this, so if she tries again, you get to witness it. Oh, Tali. You can do it, big girl. All right, anyways. So it's about context, right? What's the context? Is this a theater that's going to cast, 50-year-olds as 50-year-olds, or do they sometimes cast a 20-year-old as a 50-year-old? That's kind of the question you have to ask yourself. I say as a general rule of thumb, you've just got to know your own kind of age range and like where you fit. I have a very close friend who I think just turned 33. She's still playing like 9 and 10-year-olds on stage because she's very petite. She's got a really young face. She's got a really young like voice in terms of like her speaking voice and whatnot. And so she still plays that age. So she should have something in her book that's like a child age because that's what she's literally playing professionally, which is wild. Other people, like I could not have a song in my book that has me as a child because I just won't get cast as a child. I'm too tall. So I think you just got to kind of play around and figure out, what do I get called back for? What's the context of the show? Like what would I logically actually get called in for? And then figuring out where are the limits. I probably wouldn't play anything under 18. Like I'd be young ingenue. And I'd probably never play anything right now over like mid-20s, just because of my city. So that, I know it's super vague because it's basically like there's no answer. It's really just contextual. But I think it broadens it because a lot of times I hear people say, well, this is the hard and fast rule. You can't sing anything on Broadway that's less than 5 years old. You can't do this. You can't do this, right? All these like very hard and fast rules. But I think we have to remember that they are loose, like rules of thumb, and that context is really everything for these kinds of things. So hopefully that helps a little bit on that one. My next one is, nope, that's not a video question. Oh, I only have 3. Okay, well, I'll talk a little bit at the end then. I was looking through my inbox, and some of these are not for video. Maybe I'll answer one for video, because one of them would be a good video one. Anyways, this is a little more general, but could you please explain or demonstrate some exercises for developing a richer and fuller sound when you sing? I'm singing The Wizard and I for a showcase, and my final notes sound a lot more high and floaty as opposed to a nice full belty sound. Thank you so much. Okay, this is a really cool question because it addresses what I look at as these different aspects of our belt sound. So I'm going to preface this all by saying this is my technique and my interpretation. There are a lot of different schools of thoughts out there, and mine is just one. So I'm not saying this is the end all be all. This is just how I teach. This is my perspective. I look at us as having kind of two major areas of our belt. And a lot of people go through their low belt, that thicker, fuller sound. They hit a ceiling at about B4 and they go, that's the end of my belt. So anything above that, all that Idina Menzel, Stephanie J. Block style, I just can't do it. It's just something that's totally out of my range. And it's kind of a bummer because I don't agree with that. I think there are actually two areas of our belt, and if we think they're all going to work in the same way, we're actually going to be really confused when they don't. So this lower belt is a lot more chest mix heavy. I look at all of our belts as a type of mix, which I know is going to go against what a lot of people say. There's a lot of like, this is my true belt, this is my whatever. I look at almost everything we do in our voice as a mix of some kind. It just depends on what kind of mix we're using. So in this lower belt sound, we're using a lot thicker, richer sound, more chest dominant, brighter. So I'm going to use some hey sounds to demonstrate the differences. So down at the lower part, this hey, very shouty, very kind of boomy, right? It's thick, it's rich. Now, we can use that up to about, it's different for every person, and this is female based. Sorry guys, I don't have any excuse, but it's going to be female based. Up to somewhere between an A4 and a C5. Somewhere in there, that feeling's going to have a ceiling, and it's going to feel like, this hurts, I can't do this anymore. Above that, starting at like a C sharp, we have a lot higher, tinier sound. It's going to be stretchier. It's going to be more, it's going to have a lighter feeling. So, I'm going to demonstrate up here. Hey! So it's a very bright sound. It's not, I mean, it's a little nasal, but it's not, hey, right? It's mostly tall, stretchy, and bright. So when we're doing like, get out and stay out, I finally had enough, don't kiss me. We're using these very stretchy sounds. It's not the same as when we're down low and we're doing like, it's gonna happen sometime, maybe this time or whatever. Those two sounds, I consider them both belt, but I consider them different aspects of belt. One is this high tinny belt, I call it high belt. You could also, I would describe it even as very forward head voice, because the feeling inside, it feels nothing like low belt. It does not feel thick, it does not feel boomy, it feels really stretchy. It feels like it resonates right behind your teeth, but your soft palate is stretched really far back. And so I think a lot of it is figuring out what our expectations are with belt. Like, what do we think it's gonna be? So in Wizard and I, here's the hard thing about Wizard and I, is that it sits in this in-between spot for a lot of it. So like, for instance, on the phrase that goes, he'll say to me, I see who you truly are, a man of the da-da-da-da, right? That goes up to a C5. So remember, if we talked about the ranges, low belt goes up about to a B4, high belt starts at about a C sharp 5. Okay, so what happens on a C5 or a B4 or whatever? What happens in that area? Well, it's a pain is what happens. It feels really kind of in between and hard to hold on to because it's just gonna feel like a break almost, this spot that's like, I don't know where this goes. There are some people whose voices actually like are the best there. Sutton Foster, her voice like really good there. And that's one of the reasons her material is so hard, is because most people, I teach dozens of women, I would say almost every single one has one or two notes in between their belts that is just like, I don't know where this goes. And it takes practice to get used to figuring out how to maneuver through there, but it's always pretty tough. So Wizard and I sits there a lot. And so it's in this place that's like, well, it's not gonna have the tinniness of that really high belt, but it's not gonna have the fullness of my low belt. So what am I gonna do? So let's look at the last phrase, just like you were talking about. When we do that, the wizard and I, or whatever, and I'm just picking notes out. I don't actually know where it is, but it's somewhere around there. We've got a couple things going on. We've got this lead up from the bottom, the wizard and, or whatever. We got this lead up from the bottom that's gonna give us this thickness, but then we have I and we have a riff on it. I, or whatever. So we have a lot of options. I don't think pushing into the chest sound is gonna work. I think it's too high, personally, especially with the riff on it. The riff brings us above into high belt. So what I would do is I would play around with high belt, actually higher, like take the phrase and pull it higher. So let's do like, the wizard and I. Make it be high belt for a little bit and experience what that feels like, and then slowly pull it back down. And hopefully that'll help you drag some of that tinniness down instead of our bodies going, I need to full belt this, I need to make this big. In addition, think about the ah of I. It's a diphthong, multiple vowels in there. Ah, yi, it's kind of a triphthong, I, right? We have a lot of vowels in there. So if we go toward the E part of I, we're gonna go to a legit place. The wizard and I. It's gonna like soften up. We don't want that. We wanna go for the brightness of the ah. So one of the ways I play around with high belt is playing with this hey sound. And I'm not saying this because I want people to like just start yelling hey. There's actually like a lot of rhyme and reason behind it and a lot of teaching that I do with people. But I'll tell you guys anyways, and please just like, if something doesn't feel good, don't do it. This is not a like YouTube lesson, right? I would rather you do it safely, but I want to demonstrate what I would do. So I like to use these hey sounds up high to help me find placement for high belt. So hey, hey, it helps me find where I'm gonna go. So if I did, hey, I, and I found where that I is going to sit, then when I do, the wizard and I, do you hear the similarities now this time? It was much better than when I did it in isolation, where you could feel the similarities between the hey sound and the I sound. They actually felt more like they're in the same place, yeah? So that's what I would do to get to that pingy place and find that more present sound. Internally, it does not feel boomy. It does not feel like if we lowered it a bunch, the wizard and I, that feels thick and rich and low. This higher one feels thin. Now I'm going to reuse that word differently. Not thin because that sounds like it's throaty. I'm going to say like light. It feels light, but it feels super bright and pingy. And that's the difference. And if we did this in a head voice, the wizard and I, it actually feels almost the same, but I'm rounding up the vowels and letting them sit more in the middle of my mouth rather than bright forward. So I look at high belt and head voice as being like same coin, different sides, right? Because they actually feel so similar internally. And pretty much every student I work with, when they first discover high belt, they go, are you sure that sounds like belt? Because I think it feels more like head voice. And I'm like, trust me. I've become kind of like the belt teacher in the Twin Cities for a lot of people. And it's this like mind-blowing thing where they're like, this isn't as hard as I thought it was going to be. Like I thought it had to be harder than this. But it's not. You know, I think we confuse ourselves and think that low belt, it has to feel like high belt. And high belt has to feel like low belt. And if I can't do both, it's because it's not in my range. And that's just not the case. Just physically, you can't use a full chest voice on a high D. You just can't. Like, you cannot use your chest voice that high up. It doesn't work. And so it's like, how do we basically trick the ear into feeling like what we're making is like a very present, shouty sound, essentially. So I hope that kind of helps a little bit and gives you just some like perspective. That song, in many ways, I think it's harder than Defying Gravity sometimes because the range is just a little bit low for high belt. If it was just like a half step higher, I think it would actually be a little bit easier to deal with. But because of where it sits, it is kind of awkward and it just feels a little like, I can't get quite the intensity that I want. If it was just a little lower or a little higher. Some other roles that sit in this place are like most Disney princesses, especially if they belt, sit there, and it can be really tough to sing. Keep in mind that those songs were written for children to sing. Like, they're written to be catchy so kids sing them in the car and stuff. So they're put in this range that are kind of awkward for adult females. Audrey, Little Shop of Horrors, like Suddenly Seymour just like hits a C5 after C5 and it's just like, why could this not be a different note? But the reality is that often when they write the music for a show, they often adjust the key to fit the original singer's voice perfectly, meaning like it's meant to fit whoever, Audra McDonald's voice or whoever's voice. And if that person has a very unique and unusual range, the rest of us have to suffer their weird range or their weird passaggio or breaks or whatever. If they have really weird sweet spots that aren't kind of the average sweet spots, it makes a song really difficult to deal with. And you'll notice, once you start paying attention to this, you'll notice song after song kind of hit these odd spots where you're like, that's why this is hard. It's not just because I'm bad. It's not because it's too high. It's because it sits in this spot that doesn't work for my voice. And that doesn't mean don't sing the song. It means you've just got to figure out what's the strategy to make this note, this song, all of this stuff work for my voice, which is kind of cool. So anywho, I'm actually going to cut it there. We're at about 20 minutes. So even though it was just 3, that last one was a lengthy one. But I think it's really interesting stuff. It's some of my favorite stuff to work on in lessons with students. So I hope you guys enjoy this and learn some fun stuff. And let me know if you want to see another one. See you later.